Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Chris P, and I am thrilled today to be joined by Tom Hartley on Thursday, June 4th. Just please type in the chat box if you can hear us okay, if you can see us, or in the questions. That question bar will remain open, so type in your questions. Enough from me. Let's turn it over to our special guest and welcome Tom. Tom, thanks for joining us.
Very good to be here. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Listen, it's a pleasure. Tom is actually taking a little bit of time away from his 24 weeks, right, Charlie? Is
24 weeks? Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Tom and I were chatting yesterday, and Tom said that little Charlie spent half his life in lockup, in quarantine. We'll put it in. Lockup sounds bad, so we'll say in quarantine.
Lockup. Not quite that extreme. No, yeah. Poor little thing. He's living rather a sheltered life at the moment.
Yeah, sounds like me. But Tom, thanks for joining us. Share with us your journey, Tom.
Yeah, of course. I'm always humbled when people want to kind of hear about the route I've come down. I still feel a bit of an imposter really talking about my route, because I don't. In some respects, I think, well, is it special? Is it different? But I guess it's unique to me. So I'm probably really fortunate in the respect that I've always really had a feeling for what I wanted to do. First got taken to football when I was 8 years old. My dad Terry took me to see Swindon Town, which is the team I support. I'm sure across the state, Swindon is probably it's not the team everybody knows. So west of England, League Two, so fourth tier of football now, but they were in the playoff final against Leicester City. Glenn Hoddle was the Swindon manager at the time, so had some good names around the club, and we won the game 4-3. It was voted recently the best playoff final in history, and Swindon promoted to the Premier League. For me, never looked back since. I knew from that moment that whatever I did, it had to be football. And I'll be honest, I didn't enjoy school that much. I probably found sitting in lessons, concentrating for an hour, a challenge. So I had to relate everything back to football. If it was maths, I was running the ticket office. If it was science, I was in some kind of coaching lab, whatever it might be. But I got to about 15, 16, that aim of playing professionally, as many, I guess, young boys at that age would have. But wasn't technically good enough. I think probably that maybe others saw that ahead of me, but neglected to tell me. And I think that was probably a big driver for me in terms of the route I wanted to go down in terms of becoming a coach. I wanted to perhaps give kind of young people or children in that foundation phase such a positive experience of playing the game. And maybe if I look back, it wasn't always positive for me from a playing perspective, and I'm not necessarily criticizing the environment I was in or the coaches that I had, but perhaps for what they felt was good coaching didn't marry up with maybe what I needed as a 9-10-year-old. And then as time developed, and it was coaching became the clear pathway, I kind of went about kind of getting the level 1, level 2, level 3 qualifications. So I had my UEFA B by the time I was about 21, and kind of decided to do that thing where English coaches travel over to the States. And if I'm completely honest, I think I came over with a B license and an English accent, and I wasn't very good. I was a rubbish coach, and I think I'd got this qualification that enabled doors to be opened, but I didn't have that expertise. And after spending kind of 2-3 months coaching in the States, it really changed me, or it really had a profound impact, because getting in amongst it, I intentionally went and put myself with the youngest kids on these courses, and entering into their world was so much more of an education than being on a coaching course, because actually you got to know the kids, you got to know what was important to them, why they were coming to practice, what they enjoyed, what they lived for. And all of a sudden, as a coach, it started to think, oh, hang on a minute. It's not necessarily about the right back losing the ball in the middle of the field and the center attacker, center midfield for the other team transitioning quickly. maybe it's just about creating a really fun environment where kids can just play and be themselves. And that for me was the start of a journey I'm really lucky to, I guess, be part of. So when I came back to England, the timing was of such that the Football Association was starting a new football program called the FA Skills Program. So kind of the brainchild of a football legend here, Sir Trevor Brooking, England West Ham legend. And Sir Trevor at the time was in charge of football development at the FA. And him and a few of his colleagues had set this venture up with Tesco's, who kind of supermarket, big commercial partner, and the development of the FA Skills Program, which was there as almost a unique model of kind of a coaching program for 5 to 11-year-olds, which effectively gave children the opportunity to fulfill their potential, to be the best that they could be. But it was around the time where the FA was starting to use the 4-corner model. So not just the technical and physical side of the game, but really bringing in the importance of the psychological and social development of young people. And it was about potential rather than performance. It was about giving young people a really positive experience of sport. And I count myself extremely lucky to be part of that program, because I was one of, at the time when it started, 66 coaches who were almost at the heartbeat of, or the cutting edge, should I say, of what cool or exciting coaching looked like. So Pete Sturgis, who I'm sure many of you know the name, Pete was a driving force about how we coached. And in England, there was a bit of a change about what our coaching education pathway looked like. And whereas we typically had your level 1, level 2, level 3 qualifications, which were very much at the time about what you coach, there was an introduction of the FA youth modules. So these kind of focused in on developing the practice, developing the environment, and developing the player. So I was fortunate, as were the other coaches on the program, to be the guinea pigs, if you like, for this new exciting content, which Pete led a lot of, and we were that sounding board, that kind of sense checking group who could try out all this cool new stuff. And then we were coaching for 20 hours a week with extra time to reflect and plan. And it was a 10-year apprenticeship, in my opinion, and there was almost like this just bubble of learning going on. And if you look at the pathways of people who have come out of that program, I think it was just as impactful for the coaches as it was for the young people who we were working with on the program. I guess the link in the chain that I was missing was perhaps that work in a professional club or work in a professional club environment. So I made a move to Arsenal in 2017. And Arsenal women have got that history and that tradition for high standards in the women's game. So moved to Arsenal in 2017 and led their women and girls programs, so everything beneath academy football. And that was fascinating to step into a completely different environment to what a governing body was like. But it was awesome because I felt maybe from working in such a big organization like the FA, you as a coach, you maybe lose some of your identity. But coming into an environment where I had loads of autonomy, it was a great chance to stamp the way I'd like to try stuff out. And there was almost this collision of worlds at the same time. So I was lucky enough to meet a few people from outside of the world of football at the same time. So almost starting a journey through academia. So I started a master's in education, specializing in early years. Started looking into other sports, rugby, hockey, to see maybe what we can learn as in football. And I think football sometimes becomes a little entrenched in the way that we do things, but looking on the fringes of our worlds teaches us so much. So if you want to get better at empathy, which I think is a great skill for many coaches, go and speak to some nurses. They're awesome at this stuff. And if you want to get better at differentiation, speak to a teacher who has to deal with 30 children every day. They've got so many different learning needs and things they need support with. So yeah, going into Arsenal, where the badge is just so attractive to people, and there's a really clear pathway for female players. We were able to create, I guess, a player development pathway that was perhaps a little different, little unorthodox and maybe a little bit non-traditional, which is all me, to be honest. I'm one for challenging the status quo, and maybe to try to look to do things a little bit differently. So I've spent 3 years at Arsenal, loads of varied experiences. Really lucky to go and coach in a few different countries, different cultures, in prison. So a whole range of exciting opportunities. The work in prison was possibly some of the most rewarding stuff I've ever done, and football very much is the vehicle for change on a human level and building really strong interpersonal relationships. Through all this work, I guess I deliver the FA level 1, level 2 and UEFA courses now as part of some of the things that I do, and developing other coaches has become something which felt really important to me. And I suppose towards the end of my time at Arsenal, I was trying to find more time to spend with other coaches, and I've had a huge imposter syndrome about it. I remember the first coach education course I ran, the FA level 1, day 1, standing in front of a group of 18 dads who had kind of been hooked into coaching because their sons or their daughters play football, and standing at the front thinking, who am I to tell them about what to do? I just genuinely thought, what have they got to learn from me? And then actually you start to realize that you can make an impact in loads of different things. And I think the big thing is actually you don't need to make a massive dent in people's knowledge through tactics. If you can help people recognize the skills they've got inside themselves, and then as a coach developer ask some good questions and create some safe environments where they can just have a go at stuff. Almost the methodology you use developing other coaches is almost the same as you use developing and supporting players. So currently at UK Coaching, which almost feels like the UK's best kept secret in terms of what coaching resource looks like. So we're an independent body who effectively, I guess the strapline for the company is that we're here for the coach. So we go out and provide regular webinars at the moment, communities of practice, loads of resources. And my role in particular is about supporting the people who go and support the coaches. So if you're a coach developer, which is a fairly new space, the world of a coach developer, if you're going in to say support a coach in some way, what are some great questions that you could ask? How do you generate some really meaningful feedback? What does reflection look like, and how can you help other people reflect effectively, that type of thing. So yeah, I have to admit the last 12 weeks at UK Coaching has been a bit odd, because apart from day 1 and half of day 2, it's been in my kitchen. It's been a virtual reality job, but the learning curve has been immense. I'm surrounded by people who come from really varied backgrounds. In the team, there's some people whose life has been in academia, which for me is quite, I feel like an alien in the room when I'm talking to them sometimes. But if you can take that and apply it to practice, it all of a sudden it's like, oh, this validates some of the stuff I've done already, and has given me a whole host of new ideas. And there's people who've been Olympic performers through to people who create policy and design pathways. It's for me, I feel very lucky to be in an environment where, as much as I'm working, I'm just learning every day, which probably brings us up to now in a whistle stop 10-minute tour. I feel like I've just rambled at you, Chris.
You know what? It wasn't rambling, but you said a few things that I've got 3 pages of notes from what you were saying, right? So it was brilliant, and I loved that you said your journey was unique to you, but there were so many things that I related to in that, Tom. So first thing is finding it difficult to sit through school, right? And relating everything to football, because I was the same way, which was one of the things. You know, good coaching, talking about good coaching, just not necessarily that you were slamming the people that you had at 9 and 10, but that's what they thought about, right? That was good coaching. And I can imagine our experiences were quite the same, where you would show up to practice, you would do the fitness element at the beginning, and you were probably told, if you do good, you can play. If you behaved well, you can play at the end. Right? Yeah. So lots of times.
Yeah.
right? And then, the kids who were smarter, my mom dropped me off 5 minutes late and you missed the fitness element, whatever, right? So you could find that way. Um, so loads of things, and I'll try and go in the order of the things. You talked about being on the coaching courses, but you said what the real lesson was for you was when you came to the States having your UEFA B license as a 21-year-old. You realized it was about the Janes and Joes, not the X's and O's per se,
Oh,
right?
nice. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So just having to know who's in front of you and what was important to them. Um, Again, similar, right? I came over here as a 21-year-old and I was given the youngest group, the munchkins, as we'd call them. I didn't volunteer like you did. Um, and I think that's where you are out on that grass on that first session is where you really find out how well prepared you were for everything, right? Through the coaching courses. So tell us a little bit about, why you chose the younger ones. Obviously, you're doing your master's in early education. Have you finished that master's, Tom, or are you still studying for it?
No, I'm on the end of my second year at the moment, so I've got a year
Yeah,
to go on the course, and I think the master's stuff has probably just shone a light in an area that I hadn't really thought about before, and in some respects it's kind of confirmed some of the stuff that I was doing was actually backed up by some research, which is
yeah,
awesome. But it's maybe just the way things are written, or the way you can read about stuff in education and then bring it into football. There's so much you can apply. Why do I like working with the young kids? Am I nuts because of that? I don't know. I love just that instant feedback that you get, and I feel this with my little one Charlie on a day-to-day basis. But in a football coaching context, instantly if you've done something right, you've done something wrong, and they're not afraid to show you or tell you what they think of the type of practice that you're putting on. If they're bored, if they're disengaged, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to work out if your practice is effective on. And I think there's actually moments like that that can be really defining for coaches, because look, we all know that no practice is ever perfect, and there's always room for improvement. But if you're in that environment where you're faced with instant feedback and you're openly making some mistakes, but then you're okay with that, and you can deal with that, and you can then go away, think about it, and try and design activities or an environment that's exciting and appropriate for those people in front of you. And I think this applies if you're working with the 5-year-olds or if you're working with the under 16s. It's just about working with people, really. If you sensed in and connected with that group, then actually, I don't know. I used to plan practice and think, I've got an hour's training, whether that's with 6-year-olds or whatever. I don't know if I've got enough stuff in my head to fill a whole hour. What are we going to do to keep it exciting for that whole time? Whereas now I'm probably at the other end of that continuum to think, well, how do we fit all this into an hour? But I guess the strange thing in that is I always used to think, if a good coach is someone who can work out, I stand on cone A and I pass it to player B and I run around cone C, sit on the floor, stand up again and run back. If I can remember all that and tell the players, that makes me a good coach. And it's taken me a little while to realize, well, actually, do you know what, that's just not me. And for some coaches, that might feel right for them in the way they deliver stuff. But I guess the more time I've spent coaching, the more time I've spent practicing stuff, and I don't think there's any substitute for just giving things a go. The answers within the simplicity of the things that you do, using the game as the foundation for every type of practice that you design, and then just being really, I guess, just how can you be clever and creative with the design of the practice, the amount of freedom you give the players. I heard someone say recently about moving from handcuffs to handrails. So how can you start maybe with a novice, and it's maybe a little bit more restrictive because you're having to teach them some of the principles. If you just said to some 5-year-olds that just go and play, you'll never get them back on the field. So you need to give some clearer boundaries when they're novice, But when players become a little bit more experienced and not necessarily advanced, but they understand the rules and the concepts of the game more, then your role as a coach can change a little, and you can just give them some guiding structures to work off, and then you don't have to be the one with all the information driving the intensity. You can facilitate, you can watch, you can ask some good questions, you can stealth coach and come in and just drop in a challenge and come out again, and actually all the learnings within the kids, because actually we all learn through experience. We all learn from just going and trying stuff out. So if we're taking that away from the kids and we're doing isolated practice, which rips the context out of all the things we're trying to teach them, then actually we're depriving them of some really important learning. So by using loads of games, and I do know what, I feel like a stuck record, Chris. I harp on about games, but I genuinely feel they are the answer to everything when you're coaching. Just use different types of game to create situations that are very similar to what the players might see on a match day, and you might emphasize something here and have different types of constraint depending on what you're maybe working on. But games have got all the answers within them. It just takes the skill of the coach to tease it out.
And I love what you just said there. So I'm going to throw this at you. Obviously, we spoke yesterday and you saw where I was having to operate, which was you talked about isolated practice. So obviously during these times, COVID, strange for everybody. But what advice would you give to the people on the call and the people that will watch this later? How do you have that return to play, make it exciting, like you've said, involve the child? So our restrictions right now, Tom, are one player, one ball.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said to you yesterday, the biggest thing about it is just seeing the children socially interact, right? So I wouldn't call it social distancing. I call it physical distancing for social existence. Just watching them and seeing that smile was great. But we understand that there are complexities to what we're doing and what we're dealing with. So, what advice would you give people who are returning to play and it's one player, one ball, on ways to give voice and a choice to the kids, but also give them ownership and a little bit of autonomy working within their grid?
It's not easy, Chris, as I'm sure you can.
Right?
The benefit you have over me is that I'm looking out of the window now and it's about 12 degrees and pretty overcast, and at least you have the sunshine behind you when we spoke yesterday. I guess maybe three things, right? Three suggestions. And I don't think there's a magic pill in terms of this is what a great practice looks like, because it just depends on your players, right? And it depends on the context of where you're working. And look, these kids have been away from each other, and they maybe haven't had the opportunity to connect and to interact. And keeping distance from each other is going to feel really alien. So maybe three things that I would encourage coaches to do. Right? So be playful within whatever type of practice that you design. Okay. Now, obviously, we can't have kids playing tag games because we're getting too close. But can we play games that I don't know. I don't know what the restrictions are like and how strict it needs to be. But if you've got more boxes than you have players, and you're moving into empty boxes, that type of thing. So you can then set challenges that challenge that visual perception, that make players move in lots of different ways. And let's think about this. This is, rather than this being a threat or a weakness, it's an opportunity. None of us have been in this situation before. There's no blueprint. There's no box of drills on Google to go and look at for social distance practice. This is an opportunity for everyone to be creative. So being playful, and maybe with that is maybe everyone accepting that this might not go right tonight. So look, kids, bear with me. I'm going to try something new. It might not go well. Which actually, for a way to coach, I think is I would really advocate, because actually we want the players in our practices to try stuff out that they've maybe not had a go at before. So if we're doing that as a coach and modeling that kind of behavior, then that gives almost like an unconscious permission to the players to start trying things for themselves as well. So yeah, being playful, ask them. We don't have to have all the answers all the time, and I think sometimes perhaps a perception of coaches is that we need to hold all the information. We need to have all that knowledge. But when you play the game from the point of view as a 10-year-old, you see the game differently. From a fundamental perspective, it looks different when you're 5 foot compared to when you're 6 foot. Chris, I don't know how tall you are. I don't know if you fall in the middle of those two.
Right, exactly. 5'4". No.
But yeah, I don't know. It feels different. It looks different. The reasons to playing are different. So ask the kids, what are they most excited about when they come to train? And actually, you can use that to think, well, if you might get loads of different answers, okay? And I appreciate the coaches if you're asking that, and that's just an open question with a blank piece of paper. We could go off in many different directions. So if you're asking them what's exciting and what they want to do, maybe have some backup questions with it. Well, out of these things you've suggested, what's most important for our first practice back? Or knowing the type of team that we are, what do we need to spend more time doing tonight with the context of how we're playing that's going to help everybody get better? Maybe the stuff that they want to spend their time doing is actually they haven't seen each other. It's about having a ball and it's about getting moving, but it's also just about being connected with someone else that they haven't seen for 10 weeks. And let's face it, from a fundamental human perspective, we want to interact, we want to engage and connect, and just by being around other people, that's a brick in the wall. That's something that's really important. And I think the other points, we've got playful, ask the kids. The other is just about whatever you design or whatever you think of, it's trying to create something that at one end isn't too hard that it becomes really frustrating and also overly intense. You can't forget the fact that if you've got a ball each and you're working in a square and you're doing something over and over, that might be quite different to the type of practice you normally do. And with that, it might become physically really difficult. If you think about how long players actually have the ball in a typical practice, if they've got a ball the entire time, there's only so much repetition of a certain skill you can do. So it's almost repetition without repeating things, keeping it fresh and varied. So, but not too hard that it becomes frustrating, but also equally not too easy that it becomes really boring. Like I know Chris, you spoke to Amy Price recently about video games. And for me, I'm a massive subscriber of that approach to coaching. Since meeting Amy and spending some time around that, I cannot coach the way I coached before it. I wouldn't say that's the way I'd coach all the time, but aspects of that are always within the practices that I love to design. So incorporate some pauses. Think about different levels of the different challenges that you're setting the kids. Think about a video game that, and I'm sure Amy will have talked about this, but you continue to play because it's always just nudging you in terms of that difficulty. If you're playing Call of Duty and you die every 10 seconds, you get fed up pretty quickly. Equally, if the game's just too easy and you can run around and avoid combat, then you'll just lose interest. So it's just having that friction point. I guess it's where the clutch and the accelerator come together to get that connection.
Yeah.
I'll say that they're big things. Again, I've waffled, Chris.
I think it's huge, right? So, I mean, I'm loving this right now. And what I heard you say, so I've got a house full of people. So playful within your design, and again, setting challenges and asking the children. And then the third thing I had put down, I put it age appropriate challenged, but I also changed it to needs based, right? But you mentioned differentiation earlier within children. Ask a teacher who's teaching. And I think sometimes as coaches, we throw this blanket out and try and cover the children with what we want them to learn, and we don't take into consideration the differentiation aspects. You know, are we differentiating by task, outcome, process? You know, how is the child? But the connection thing kept coming up, Tom, which I thought was brilliant. And you know, I think we all stand on the shoulders of giants, and we all get that imposter syndrome. But the quote that I came up with from another friend was Maslow before Bloom there, right? Yeah. So just making sure that the connection piece is really there, which is huge, which everybody needs, right? And I just think it was huge, but also being vulnerable as a coach, saying, hey, this is the first time I'm trying this. Because I think when you ask people, do you want better players? Yes. Do you want more creative players? Yes. My answer is usually then become a better coach and become a more creative coach, right? Because everybody wants the best players, but really the fulfilling potential thing, it just keeps coming in and keeps coming up, and and everybody's potential is different, isn't it? Everybody's ceiling is different, everybody's lens is different, but how we do that and get children, I think, do we get them to fall in love with the game first, or do we get them to fall in love with the ball first, right? And I think once you get them to fall in love with the ball, everything else becomes easier. I hold coaches meetings for our grassroots volunteer coaches, and then I try and support them. Not enough, to be honest, because that's where the foundation is, and that's where the base of our younger players are coming through. But I will ask them, what do you coach? And they all say, well, I coached American football, I coached basketball, I coached the under-12 girls. And then sometimes someone will say to me, well, what do you coach? And I say, well, I coach children, and I use football as the vehicle. And they're like, oh, you're one of these fruity people, and
hippie style coaching, right?
yeah, and like, I'm smiling because you're saying use the games. My pendulum swung, and having coming over to America as a 21-year-old and then coming back, but I became a games-based coach, right, or storied learning. So not quite video game design but gamification per se, whether it's a story with the U6s. Hey, use your ball. Your ball is your backpack. And, well, why am I using my feet? Well, no, we're just exploring the jungle or something. Do you know what I mean? So just getting into the lives of children. But you said earlier, right, there's a certain thing about young children, right? Out of the mouth of babes is the quote. Or yeah. There's a Greek saying, I'm Greek Cypriot of descent, right? And it was, my mum always used to say, you will always learn the truth from a child or a crazy person, right? A child because they're young and innocent, and a crazy person because they just don't care. They're going to say it. Yeah. So you get instant feedback from children. Coach, this is boring, and then of course the other children follow. So I think that's huge, right? But getting into their world, looking through life in their lens, but knowing who's in front of you. And a quick little story. So we used to play a little game called Bring Back, or Travel Agents. And I would have the children come over, and the rule was they would hand you the football with two hands, and you would ask them, where would you like to go? And the kid would say, well, I want to go to Florida. So you throw the ball away, and then you tell the kid, okay, bring it back using your feet. So I had a group of 5-year-old kids, and Jack is now 22, and he's at the Air Force Academy. And I said to Jack, he gave me the ball, and I said, Jack, bring the ball back using your imagination. Well, Jack was 5 at the time. He stood there like this. And I carried on with the other children in the group. And then Jack, 5 minutes later, it's taken me 5 minutes to realize, well, Jack's still standing there going like this. And I'm like, Jack, what are you doing? He says, Coach, I'm using my imagination, but the ball still won't come back.
That was sweet.
So we have to be literal, right, with our instruction or direction or interventions with children, right? Be specific, exactly what we want, but put it in their language.
Well, that's it. And do you know what? You could be the best coach in the world, but if you can't have that connection, and if you can't speak the language that they speak, then you'll really struggle. So it's, another coach much wiser than me kind of said, look, you've got all this knowledge and this information over here, and you've got a 5-year-old over here. You just have to be that filter that sifts out the best bits for them today. And that might not be the same as when you see them next week, but it's just selecting the right information that they need right in front of you. And I think you talked about that differentiation piece, and I was on a call yesterday. So I started my UEFA A license. Was supposed to start about 6 weeks ago. Because of COVID, it's changed, and the start of the course now has been made online, and we're doing some workshops each week. And on the call, I had this moment of real I felt really uncomfortable, because they were saying, right, within your hour and a half practice, you need to have some position specific outcomes for your 2 centre backs, your 8 and your 4, your 9 and your 10. and then you have to be able to get this through. I was like, oh my goodness, how do you spend an hour and a half, and how do you coach all these things? And I'm so glad I asked the question to clarify, because they agreed that you can't coach everyone to every level of detail in a practice. You just will completely the quality of your session will just evaporate, and it will become completely diluted. So the way I've looked at it, there's a coach in the UK, you may have heard of him, Ben Bartlett.
Yeah.
So Ben, at Fulham now, worked at the FA with Ben for a while, and Ben's one of those people I love talking to Ben, because I felt like I could talk to him for 10 minutes and he would give me a response of 3 bullet points and just put it so brilliantly, and kind of genius quality of Ben. But I asked him that question about, well, how many players do you aim to coach in your practice? And he said, well, if you design a great session, everybody will have some really, really positive outcomes and will have a great experience, but just pick 3. Because actually, if you try and do more than 3, then what you're trying to get across will just get lost. And as a coach, you'll get stressed, you'll forget stuff. And if you're forgetting stuff, how do you expect the kids to remember it? So just pick the 3 players you want to have the most impact on. And when you come to coaching next week, it might be the same 3 again, but actually you might pick some different players based on what your team needs and what they need. And for me, that just simplified the whole thing. I think, let's design games that have got attack, have got defense, have got transition, that if I was just to play and the coach didn't say anything to me for the first 20 minutes, I'm still going to get loads out of this. But then as a coach, I can be really purposeful in what I engineer and what I'm an architect of outside of that. And just linked to that, I guess when you were talking, you got me thinking about, what do we want to get out of practice? Where are we trying to get to? Because we're picking all the kids up from different bus stops and we're dropping them off in different places. So for me as a coach, perhaps it was always about an Everest. I always wanted to go and put my flag in the top of this mountain and mark where I've got to at the end of practice, or where I want the players to get to. But that's not real. That's not life, because then they're never all going to get to the place that you want them to. But we could discover some really exciting stuff along the way. So for me, I've shifted from an Everest to a treasure map. And for me, that treasure map means we've got some fuzzy goals now. We're going out and we're discovering some stuff, and I'm okay if a session takes a swing to the left and we're doing something completely different to where we started. Because if it's built around the needs and the interests of those kids, then actually as a coach, we can be there to maybe guide some exploration. So rather than that guided discovery that we hear about as a coaching style, let's go down a guided exploration route. Because guided discovery maybe means we will have to come to the same point at the end, which sometimes is fine. We need to have that convergency sometimes. But guided exploration, I find that really exciting, because if I was that 8-year-old, I'd think, oh, I can find my way in this, and it doesn't matter if it's not exactly the same as everyone else's, but there's something in it for me.
Yeah, and I've heard Stuart Armstrong talk about guided exploration.
Awesome.
Is Stuart at the UK coaching too?
Yes, Stuart's not at UK coaching, but we kind of have lots of crossover within his world and the world we have. So
Yeah, brilliant. So you talked about the treasure map, right? From Everest to the treasure map, which I loved. And there's different ways of discovering the treasure, isn't it? It's like when you said that, what I pictured in my mind is like one of those line mazes that people can go through.
Okay, cool.
Do you know what I mean? So that's what went in my mind. And then I thought, well, children are going to start in different places, right? But they may end up in the same place. Some of them may not end up in the same place, but that's okay too. And I love that. And what I heard there was needs. So instead of being player centered, can we be needs centered? And everybody's needs are different.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
But I think the advice that Ben gave you too was goldless, right? Pick 3 and focus on 3, because of course you can't focus on the 2 centre backs, the 2 central midfielders, and the 2 strikers if you're playing with 2, whatever. So you've got to peel back the layers and go, well, how does this player interact with that one, and how does his actions affect this one, and stuff like that. So yeah, I did my UEFA B some years ago, because I didn't have a good experience with my American licenses. But then they've got this grassroots instructor's license, which is basically you go on, you do this course, and we teach the new way, the new methodology, which is one of the methodology, which is play, practice, play. So in order to get this license, this instructor's license, I had to have had my American B license. So I went recently and did my American B license, and had similar experiences, right? Like imposter syndrome. I'd been coaching for a long time. I'm a certified teacher through PE through Worcester University, and I'm thinking my whole world's kind of all collided and came together, because the way they were teaching, the way they were doing things was games based, and we were fortunate enough to have America's GOAT for soccer, Landon Donovan, was in the class with us. So it was interesting to hear his experiences and stuff like that. But I just think it's huge, and I'm just looking at the clock here. We've been going for 44 minutes already, Tom.
Where's that gone?
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about how you support, or how you would support grassroots coaches, whether they're volunteer or voluntold. Let's come up with some, must-haves and maybe have-nots to support grassroots coaches, whether they're novice or experienced, and helping them on the road to fulfill their potential as a coach, to help fulfill the potential of those that they reach and touch. And I'm gonna use the old African proverb of, give a man a fish, feed him for a day; teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime. How do we go down that route, or what advice can you give us, to really dig a little deeper and go on a journey with these coaches that they can take the players on and just breathe life into the sport for children? Yeah. And just before Tom starts, right, I knew you were writing down things. If you guys do have questions, please start thinking about them and typing them in, because I want to be sensitive to Tom's time and getting back with Charlie. But I've got a feeling this one could be, this could be a webinar in itself, just this that we're discussing, right? And maybe 2 or 3. So yeah, Tom, absolutely. If you want to start.
Of course, Chris, yeah, absolutely. So what support can you give to grassroots coaches? Well, I've always found from being, I guess, in my role and my hat, and I think this is probably a really important differentiation to make, right? So if someone's delivering a coaching course, typically they're in a role of a coach educator, but a coach educator might then have to wear some different hats. So in my role at UK Coaching, I'm a coach developer, which has some subtle differences. It's not about assessment, it's about helping people almost fill in the gaps that they might find on coach education. And there's some research I saw recently showing that in the UK, there's something around 3 million coaches in the UK, that there's almost half of them who do it voluntarily without necessarily some of the qualifications that perhaps are there. They just coach because it's around them, they're doing it. So for me, we need to be the wind beneath the wings of these grassroots coaches and give them the opportunity to go out and try stuff. And in that similar ethos about to removing that fear of failure, perhaps some of the things that we see in grassroots coaches is that they will tend to go and coach the way that they were coached. And Chris, you and I both know that what coach development and coach education looks like now is quite different to maybe what it was 5, 10, 15 years ago. And there's expectation as well attached to these grassroots coaches. That could be from the club that they're working in, and that expectation could be around being here every week at this time, whatever it might be. There's expectation from parents as well, and I'm sure we can have a whole other conversation about that relationship between athlete, coach, and parent, because that's tough, and especially if you're a volunteer coach, navigating that is really, really difficult. And almost traditional things that we expect of what good coaching looks like, and perhaps some traditional views about what good coaching is could be, well, some organization here, some kids stood in lines, some things where stuff's repeated a lot, and as we know, well, actually that's maybe not giving the players the best possible experience. So what could we do to support grassroots coaches? I think it's about creating an environment where they can come and coach and just try stuff out. And maybe if I was running a grassroots club or a grassroots organization, I don't necessarily subscribe to the idea of giving people lots of practices to go and replicate. But maybe there's a halfway house between not giving volunteers anything and giving them all the answers. So giving them that fish every time rather than the rod. So if I was running a grassroots club, I'd love to give coaches lots of session starters, right? So here are some arrival activities that you could do that could help influence the type of practice that you do with your players, to just almost plant some seeds to help them do the right things. But there's probably some qualities around how we coach that overshadow what we coach. So do you create an environment where it's safe for kids to come and just be themselves? Do you care about the experience of the people who are there? And there was a saying, and I might get this quote completely wrong, but it's about, well, if the people who you're working with see that you care, then they care about what you know. And having that, it goes back to connection again, and having that connection with the people around you is absolutely massive. Then something that I've come across recently, and this has fallen out of the work I've been doing on my master's and some of that extended reading, and I was delighted to see that some of this stuff is being included in the children's license in some of the Canadian coaching qualifications, is about transformational coaching, right? So there's lots of theory and loads of research about transformational leadership and these different ways of idolized influence, being an inspirational leader and inspirational motivation, that type of thing. And then there's some kind of researchers, so Jean Cote, Jen Tunridge, who are based at kind of Queen's University in Canada, who have done lots of work around taking some of these principles around transformational leadership and applying them directly into a coaching context. And they've identified 11 behaviors that as a coach, if you're able to demonstrate them on a regular basis, the impact you can have on the kids around you is transformational. And for me, that is so much more important than the tech tac stuff, because if you get the potential side of it right, and if you're focusing on behavior rather than outcome, then the impact is massive. Because let's face it, we're not necessarily going to be developing the next US international star or the next professional footballer in the Premier League, but every single one of those players in our teams are going to become members of our society, and they're leaders within themselves and they're leaders within the group. So there's so many things we can do as coaches to help model those behaviors ourselves, and then help the young people demonstrate those behaviors within. So give you a couple of examples of what they might be, right? So one are modeling pro-social values like humility and vulnerability. So as a coach, that's trying stuff out, having a go and saying to the kids, this is my first time trying this tonight. Or it's demonstrating that humility. How do we act when we win? How do we act when we lose? And just by demonstrating what those positive values are in yourself, then that impact and that influence it has on the children around you is absolutely massive. Engaging the views of the athletes or engaging the views of the players, that's a massive one as well, because actually when you ask for their opinion and you're sincere about it, and you use that opinion to shape what you might do next, then how empowered and valued would the kids feel in your practice? The only other thing that I would maybe suggest away from these transformational behaviors, and I think you could do loads and loads of stuff about this, is choice. And I think this links into, and for me, one of the top behaviors you could dial up as a coach, and I like to think about coaching sometimes as you've got that sound deck in front of you, like you're a 1990s DJ, and the one I would always want to turn up is choice. Give players loads of choice. And I'll draw an example to this, and it's quite an extreme example, but I think it's an extreme environment. So I mentioned in my intro about working in prison. So I did some work, I do some work at the moment with a project in England called the Twinning Project, set up by David Dean, who used to be the vice chairman at Arsenal, hugely influential figure and an incredible person in the world of football. So he set this program up, and it's using football as a vehicle to change lives ultimately, and to contribute towards reducing reoffending and having an impact on people finding employment after they come out of prison. So I'd never been in that environment. I'd never thought I'd work in that environment. But going in there is almost any behavior you demonstrate in the outside world with your under 14s academy group is just amplified by 100% when you go into this environment. And when you give people their choice, when their day-to-day life doesn't involve any of it, and it's choice almost with a small c, okay? So it's, would you like the practice to take place in 5 minutes or in 20 minutes? There's a friend of mine who's got a kid, right? And he said if he wants his daughter to go to bed in 15 minutes, he'll say, would you like to go to bed now or in 15 minutes?
15. Was that Rusty Earnshaw?
It wasn't Rusty who said it, but I'm sure Rusty used it. So again, in the prison environment, the choice could be small, but let's take that to our worlds. What choice can we give our players? So it could be choice about the type of activity that we do, or it could be choice within the activity that we're playing. Do I dribble with the ball? Do I pass the ball? Do I move into a space, or do I stand still? And maybe just by standing still, that creates a space within itself. So if I was speaking to a grassroots coach and it's their first time stepping onto the grass, I think number one thing would be give the players some freedom in the way they act, some autonomy, and you will get so much more back from them.
Yeah, I love that. I love it. Voice and a choice is what we call it, Tom.
Nice.
You know, give them a voice, give them a choice. But you know, go in with a plan. But I think what happens is you know, so we're in a very we're in a military based area, so Virginia Beach. So there's Navy SEALs, there's Army, there's Navy, and there's a lot of people. And I'm not saying not having a structure, but there's a lot of people that might see a game going on, a game of tag, whether it's movement, whether it's why we're doing that, but they perceive that as non-structure. And what people want to see is they want to see instant success. So if I have if I could have 10 players in a grid all dribbling, right? I'm asking them to dribble. They're going to get out of it what they're going to out of it. They're going to get their head up because there's 10 players dribbling in a grid. Now, what's a lot tidier is asking kids to stand in lines and dribble through cones, you know, and that makes their dribbling look neater, you know. So it's actually explaining to coaches, and you touched on it earlier, but many people are going to coach the way they were coached as well, right? And coaching education has changed. It changes. I mean, look at coaching education now. Tom, you just said you're doing your UEFA and your first part's online, right? It's not in person, but yeah. But when we look at, you know, teaching and kids in classrooms, that's changing too, right? So we have to change. We have to adapt, and you know, maybe the school system is one that can learn and pivot and change throughout this. You know, my wife's a special ed assistant, and they're talking about how school looks when they go back. Is it 2 days in class, 3 days online? Is it, you know, so many moving parts, as you said. But we did have a question that's come through. Let me try and pull it up. I'll manage the question box. What are your thoughts on direct instruction? This is from Jeff Muir.
Direct instruction. In what context? I guess it's hard to ask Jeff back, but
that's okay. No, I'll unmute him. I'll get him on and I'll unmute him. Jeff's a friend. He's coming to us from Missouri. He's a state director of coaching there. Jeff, if you're ready and still listening, I'm gonna unmute you. I know you're good for a question, but this Jeff, do you want to unmute? Oh, he might have typed in the chat again. Oh, he's unmuted. Go, Jeff. Hey, Jeff, how are you? Jeff, if you're talking, we can't hear you. Jeff, can you hear me? No, so. All right, Tom, sorry, guess and go. Oh, so there we go, he's typed it in. Thanks, Jeff. He said, as opposed direct instruction, as opposed to guided discovery.
Okay. Jeff, I think the answer for me is it depends, and it probably depends what your players need at that point in time. So I'm going to get all theoretical, right? And I know that could be a turn off for some people, so I'll keep it brief. So there's something called Vygotsky's zone of proximal development.
Proximity.
So, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, but it's almost, well, players, people, kids can get to a point on their own, but then they need that intervention of someone who maybe knows a bit more, or someone who can help them move in the right direction to get them to the next stage. So actually, sometimes we need to be able to give some information to that player or to that person to help them solve that problem. Because actually, if we don't do that, they could become frustrated, their confidence is going to drop, they're going to lose their self-esteem, and there's so many negatives for not doing it. For me, though, it's just getting the timing of when the direct instruction is. Because I think sometimes as coaches, we can be Google for the kids too quickly. We can shortcut all that learning that could come about from making some mistakes. So maybe is it a case of, right, we've noticed that they've not got it right this time. Let's see if they can have another go. And maybe it's on the third or the fourth time. And again, this depends. Maybe at that point, you find a way of stepping in, and it might not be an instructions to start with. It might just be an open question. And you might want to shine a searchlight so they're looking in the right direction, but you're not telling them what to see. And then if they're still not getting it, it's finding the right time to be a bit more direct. And I wouldn't say there's a perfect amount of times that you let a player make a mistake, or there's a perfect timing for when to step in. But I just think that absolutely some direct instruction is a tool in the toolbox, which is important for coaches, but it's just understanding when's the right time to use it.
Yeah, I love that. And I was right in there. You know, the first thing I would say is, you know who's in front of you, right?
Yeah.
Maybe know a little bit about how their day's been, and then put the right info at the right time to the right person in the right tone, right? So, and then I think it's Mark Bennett. Have you come across Mark Bennett and his work?
No.
He's got PDS coaching, and he talks about the rule of three. And the rule of three is the final thing is the coach intervention. The first one is like self-correction, and the second one is if I see you struggling, which again we're teaching empathy, can I help you as a player? And the third one is I'm really stuck. I'm going to ask the coach, or the coach is going to step in. So just that, and I love that. There's another question that's come in. And the question is from Steve, my good buddy Steve Support. Thank you for your question. And his question is Tom, you talk about giving choice. Can we give examples of giving children 6 and under a voice and a choice? And I think you did in that with do you want to go to bed now or in 5 minutes? Do you want to pass the ball, or do you want to dribble the ball? But can we maybe give a couple of other things for Steve?
Yeah, okay. So I'll try and explain a practice that I really enjoy that gives choice, but as a coach, you're limiting the choices. So if they choose this or choose that, it's okay. But it's a constraint with choice. So I'll give you a whistle-stop tour of a 60-minute practice. So you've got 2 teams playing against each other, Blues v Reds. First part of the game, blue team, in the build-up to scoring a goal, the amount of passes that you make before you score equals the amount of goals. So they're being rewarded for more passes. Now, because we've all played that game where you're saying, well, everybody has to touch the ball before we score, but that's not necessarily game appropriate if I've got an open goal in front of me and I have to pass it back to someone who hasn't touched the ball yet. And there's a risk and reward there. So shall we be brave and go for another 4 passes, or should we just bank it now and get the quick goal? So there's choice within that. So that's the red team, that's their challenge. The blue team, your challenge in the same game is when you receive the ball, the more players you dribble past before you score equals that amount of goals. So it's the same type of thing, and it's more of an individual challenge here. But actually, you're ultimately challenging the players whose team has the ball but they don't, to get into good positions to help create spaces. So there's so much going on because it's a game, and then you give the teams the opportunities to swap their challenges, to talk about this, to talk about the success, the failure, what's worked, what hasn't. And the way that the practice culminates is everyone's playing to the same rules, but you're only allowed 1 touch or 3 every time you receive the ball. So that, again, there's a restriction, but there's choice within what the player does when they receive it. So we might use 1 touch when there's a quick pass on, or when I'm stuck in a corner and the ball's being pinged into me and it's not a very helpful pass and I have to move it quickly. Or I might use 3 when I need to find maybe a more creative solution to the challenge I'm faced by the opponent. And you'll be surprised, or maybe you won't be surprised, but when you play this game with kids who have never played it before, the error count is so high because they're not used to having the space to have to think about thinking. And that's like Amy stuff, the metacognition. But all of a sudden they have to be really deliberate in the way that they have to play based on what's in front of them at that moment in time. So they're recognizing triggers and cues, and all of a sudden this experience that they get in this type of practice correlates directly with the type of pitches they're faced with in the game at the weekend. Now look, in a game they can have as many touches as they need, but by using these types of restrictions, you promote quick play and you promote a level of confidence on the ball under pressure.
Yeah, brilliant. Although U6s, they're about themselves, they don't pass too much. Where we're at, you know what I mean? We focus a lot on dribbling, but I loved I've got notes there, and I'm smiling, Tom, because I use both those games, right?
Oh.
The messy dribbling game is the one that you dribble past the players and score. That's how many goals, and it's refreshing to see that experts like yourself are using them as well. So brilliant. So we did have another question, and I want to again be sensitive to your time, because I could have this conversation all day, to be honest. But this question's come in. It says, with your education in early childhood, how has that influenced you in understanding the development of physical, emotional, and psychosocial development? That was a long question. I can read it again.
Finish on an easy one. Oh my goodness.
Well, this is the question. Well, this question has come from a lady that's a retired PE teacher and taught for 31 years. So I think there's many parts to that, isn't there? It says, with your education in early childhood, how has that influenced you in understanding the development of physical, emotional, and psychological development?
Great question.
And you can't say it depends. You can't say it depends.
Okay. I would
well,
say, and bearing in mind, right, my education master's is focusing on early years. It's about, for me, helping young people develop a really positive relationship with movement and finding a joy in movement and understanding how their body feels, how they feel, recognizing things that happen whilst they're moving, with the ball, without the ball. So I think it's wider than football, much wider. And a big thing I would want to link back into that within your considerations when you're designing practice is play and the importance of play. Because actually, if we're utilizing free play, if we're utilizing some fantasy play, if we're utilizing some rough and tumble, then actually we're building upon psychosocial development in a huge way. We're giving kids the opportunity to make sense of the world and make sense of what's going on around them. But if they've got that opportunity to move freely, and as coaches we can be then really skillful in understanding the degrees of freedom that we give within those types of movements, then we create opportunities for the young people to find movement solutions to challenges that then we would create. So yeah. I hope that answers to an extent, but I think if play, especially with young people, is a major component of your practice, then that psych and that social element of development will follow naturally.
Yeah, I love that, and I love that. And we've gone down the route of implementing the play practice play methodology, so which is different to the whole part whole, and it's different because obviously in the whole part whole we start with the whole game, isolate what we need to, whether it's passing or the movement of the back four, and then you go back to the whole game. With play practice play and play one, Tom, what we do is we start with really small-sided games. So whether it's 1 against 1, 2 against 1, 2 against 2, 3 against 2, 3 against 3. Then we go into the practice part, which has is it organized? Is it game-like? Is there repetition without repetition? Is there challenge points? Is there effective, like you spoke about earlier, not too hard, not too small, and then is there effective coaching? So then there's that practice part, and then the play part looks a little bit like the bigger game depending on your numbers. But I think what we forget here is the unstructured play and how important that is, and letting children develop the rules or develop the how do you, well, one team shirt, no, we do games like no pinnies, and the kids go, well, we don't know who's on our team. And then one kid came up, go, let's do like we do at recess, untuck your shirt and mine's tucked in. So
nice.
Just little things where again we're involving them and giving them choice, and taking them on this journey where they become lifelong engaged participants, right? And it doesn't have to be a football, whether they just, I hear of leagues in China, Tom, that they have 80-year-old leagues, but it's walking football only,
Love that.
right?
Love
You
that.
know, so little things. Wow. Listen, we've been on over an hour, Tom, and I want to, you know, I want to keep going, but I want to be sensitive to your time. You know, I have a bunch more questions in the words of Amy Price. Maybe we should pause our progress right here.
Nice.
And
Yeah.
then when your time allows, we'll have you back for a second one, right? Maybe when you finish your masters, or tell us a little bit more about the work, and we'll pick up from there. And then I had some one-word questions for you, some other questions, but we can dig deeper on that framework and support and coach developers. Did you ever take that coach developer course that Alex Twitchin was involved in? There's a 24-hour coach developer course.
Is that the one with the Open University?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I've seen it, and we're connecting with it at work, but I haven't been on it yet.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's fantastic. But you know, good, rich stuff. And Tom, we look forward to some of the stuff you're doing. And if people wanted to reach out or get a hold of you, or see some of your work, you know, how would they go about that?
Best bet is just through my Twitter is probably a good place to follow. So that's at Thomas W. Hartley. Hartley, Hartley. So yeah,
Brilliant.
That would be the best way.
Brilliant. And then I want to give you the final words. Was there maybe a question I asked you that I didn't ask you that I should have asked you? Or any last bit of information you'd like to share with us until next time?
Chris, you're an awesome host, so I won't say there was any question that you shouldn't have asked. So someone said this to me the other day, and it stuck with me. And I think for any coach listening, it's something to really think about. Is there comes a time when you need to stop listening to experts and back yourself. And I think perhaps as coaches, we can all be guilty of becoming fascinated with different things at different points. We all go on a course, and then the next 3 weeks we coach just like they told us on the course. But that might be really unhelpful for what we're actually trying to achieve in the long run. So listening to, talking to, looking at, reading about, watching experts is useful, but back yourself. Think about what makes you the coach that you are.
Yeah, brilliant. I love that. I love that. I could talk to you all day, man. I could talk to you. I could ask you about reflection, but we'll save that. I think we're going to stop listening to experts.
We have to do a sequence for this, Chris. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, good. I would love to. I would love to. And you know, I'm going to reflect on this as well. And any feedback you can give me on how to make the process better or easier, or have people with takeaways. But it's so rich. I've got 6 or 7 pages of notes. We didn't even get to touch upon the prison stuff, you know, which is another thing I need to talk to you about as well. But
there's some stories for that one as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. But listen, I want to be sensitive of your time, and thank you. And just on behalf of Rush Soccer and Sky Eddie Bruce, thank her for her forum. But thank you for spending your afternoon with us when you could have been with Charlie and watching him develop. We wish you luck in everything you do. I'll keep following you. I'm a curious coach, and we'll connect again. And I'll try not to bother you too much on the Twitter sphere and over the phone. But thank you, and I look forward to our sequel.
Always a pleasure, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thanks so much, Tom. I'm just trying to figure out a way to stop this recording. I think the only way is to abruptly get off. I'll call you in a bit, Tom.
Okay, Chris, I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to go for a walk for half an hour. So maybe just chat this evening, if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem. Just want to say thank you anyway. So
I know. Pleasure.
Thanks so much.
All right, cheers, buddy. Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you.